Welcome, and thanks for joining our session, Journey to the Sage Intacct Cloud with the American Aluminum Association. Just a few reminders. During this session, you will have the opportunity to chat any messages that you may want to have answered. There will be a moderator during the presentation that will try to answer those questions. And if any of those need to be taken offline, we'll take them offline and then respond to you via email afterwards. Keep in mind that each of these sessions are being recorded, so if you want to go back and replay them, or if you have other team members that would like to see them and were unable to join during the conference, they can run those recordings anytime that they want to, and they'll be available for an extended period of time. And then finally, at the end of today's sessions, don't forget to fill out your questionnaires. There will be a drawing at the end, and your entry into that drawing is questionnaires. Lots of fun gifts. There's an espresso machine, which I would like to see myself, and a wine subscription if you choose to do as well. So please don't hesitate to do that. So our agenda today is we're going to talk about a customer's journey to the Sage Intacct Cloud. We're going to talk a little bit about, we'll do an introduction of Jennifer Cassidy, who is with the Aluminum Association, who has performed this journey. We'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons why the decision was made, some of the things that we ran into or she ran into and how she addressed them, and then looking forward what she's interested in doing next with Sage Intacct. So let me introduce myself quickly. Jeff Fonasek, Principal Architect here at Quisitive, 30 years or so in the industry, experience with the Dynamics SL and GP products, as well as about 13 years of experience with Sage Intacct in helping clients move from those classic products to Sage Intacct. When I'm not working, I'm an avid cyclist. I like to do endurance cycling, which means doing 100 miles at a time. And when you sit in a seat for 100 miles, you have a lot of time to think. So I work out a lot of my problems and strategies going forward. I really enjoy that. Joining me today is Jennifer Cassidy. Jennifer Cassidy is the Vice President of Finance Administration with the Aluminum Association. And in that role, you can see she wears many hats. Excuse me, many hats. Jennifer also has had the opportunity of working in the association market space and as an implementation consultant for many ERP softwares. So she's had the opportunity of seeing both sides from an implementation, both the consulting and the client side as well. And she's a member of many organizations. She lives in Vienna, Virginia, and she enjoys outdoor playing tennis, cycling, and running. Thank you for joining us, Jennifer, and sharing your story today.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. And I'll just clarify, although I do cycle, I don't do 100-mile rides.
Hey, anytime you have on a bike is a great day. If you
I agree.
All right, so we're going to start. This is going to be a dialogue session where Jennifer and I will just talk about the experiences and share. And so we've positioned a couple questions to help move that dialogue across. So the first section is going to be around the planning for the ERP section. And there's a couple questions like, what were the primary objectives of implementing Sage Intacct? What specific problems and inefficiencies were you trying to address with Sage Intacct? So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about the Aluminum Association and where you were and why you made the decision to move to Sage Intacct.
Yeah, so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When I started with the association, so this was at the end of 2021, I literally felt like I had stepped back into time. So the organization had been using SL for over 20 years, which is fine. I've been using SL for most of my career, and I like the product. But even accessing SL was a huge endeavor. So I'll go through the steps. So to access the software, I had to log into my laptop. Then I had to connect through a VPN to our network. Then I had to connect to another VPN within our network to get to the server where the accounting software was on. And then I had to log into the software. So that's 4 logins. And when I started, I said to myself, we have got to modernize what we have right here. So it took a little over a year to get to the point where I felt like, okay, we now have the time to devote to this. So basically, we were in desperate need of modernizing our access, but also our processes. Everything related to finance and accounting was paper-based. And considering that we were at a time when we were just coming out of the pandemic, most people were either not in the office or in the office just a couple of days a week. It just was frustrating and inefficient. If we needed to look at backup or something, we had to physically go to the office in order to see that. So that was one of the inefficiencies, was just that everything was paper-based. The second thing was that we could not generate an ACH file out of SL. And so at this time, more and more vendors were asking that we pay them electronically, and some even begging, because they were small businesses. And if we sent them a check, someone had to actually go to the office to get the check to make the deposit. And because the only way we could make the electronic payments were to do it one by one by logging into the bank and setting them up as a beneficiary, it just wasn't efficient. So we almost always said no. And then the last major problem that I'll mention is that our budget managers, they couldn't easily access the information that they wanted. Our process at the time was that we would generate the financial statements out of FRX and export it to Excel, email it to each of the users one by one. And that's fine. They could see their financial statements, and even in Excel, they're able to drill down to see the description of the transactions. But a lot of times that's not enough. And so they wanted to see the backup documentation or no more. And again, because we weren't paperless, that wasn't something they could see, or they would ask us and we couldn't see it. We had to go into the office to do that. So to summarize my answer to your second question, Jeff, we wanted to become paperless. We wanted to easily pay our vendors electronically, and we wanted to give a financial statement users more information. And I know, having been, as I mentioned, I've used SL, like I started with SL back in the 90s, used it for years and years. And I know that there are add-on products for SL that we could have purchased and implemented that would have helped us with some of these problems. But I mean, the bottom line is I feel like SL is now a dinosaur, and it pains me to say that because it's a solid product, but updates aren't being made. We know that it's being phased out. So the time had come to move on. And at the organization that I was at prior to this, we had migrated to Intacct, and I was familiar with it and I was happy with it. And luckily, our CEO was very supportive of the move to Intacct. And I will add that the fact that Intacct is endorsed by the AICPA, that's just like an added bonus. So for example, like when we were explaining to the board that we were doing this, I could say, and it's endorsed by the AICPA. So anyway, that's hopefully answers the questions that you had.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer. And I like to say about SL, I love SL. I grew up on SL. I have many clients grow their business in SL. We built a practice off of SL. We really loved it. And it's a product that took many of our customers for 20 to 30 years. It took them for 20 to 30 years. And now it's time to think about what is the next 20 or 30 year product that's going to carry you forward. And I think Sage Intacct is a really good choice for that, for all the same reasons you described. Easy accessibility from anywhere in the world, modern architecture, modern functionality like paying bills via ACH, and then disseminating that information to users who can, on a real-time basis, drill into the performance of their departments, their program, whatever it is that they're doing, and be able to drill back into details and see attachments and things like that, so that they can answer their questions, which sort of eliminates the need to call accounting and say, can you give me the backup on this? And all that back and forth that used to happen. Now people can self-service themselves with Sage Intacct, and I think it's a great tool for that. So thank you.
Exactly. Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about timeline and consideration. So many of the folks probably listening to this are thinking, well, what is it going to take to migrate from where I am to a cloud-based solution like Sage Intacct? What does it look like? What level of effort am I going to have to put into it? What are the deadlines and things I need to think about in managing it? So tell us a little bit about the timeline it took for you to migrate. What were some of the key factors that were driving that timeline? And if you ran into any things you had to sort of, or hurdles you had to overcome with respect to timeline, conferences, things like that, how did you manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for us, we started the project in mid-March, and our original plan was that we would go live by June 30th. Now, I knew that was a little bit ambitious, and so what we decided was, okay, we're going to try for this. This is going to be our goal number one, but if we need to, we can push it back. So that gave us just a little bit of flexibility. We did end up pushing it back, and I'll talk about why in just a moment. And we ended up going live September 1st. So in total, for us, it took about 5 months for us to implement it. Now, one thing I'll say here, and this is one of the reasons it took us actually longer than our original plan, was that we decided that as long as we're migrating, let's just make change, let's fix whatever else we think is wrong. And we wanted to update our chart of accounts. Our a chart of accounts, we had it was 6 digits in SL, and that was just too long for us. We didn't need that. So we reconfigured our chart of accounts. We made them 4 digits. We made a few changes to our departments in SL, our sub accounts. And so that was part of the reason why it took longer, just trying to figure out how we were going to make those changes. So a few of the critical milestones that we had, and there were pretty many, but these were the biggest ones. Well, so first of all, we needed to be able to cut a check that was approved by our bank. We wanted to be able to generate an ACH file that was in the required format that our online banking required. We had to have our vendors and our customers in the system. And then for us, we needed invoice templates so that we could invoice our members, because we have members and we invoice them for different things, and we have different types of members. And so the invoice that we use for each of those is a little bit different. So each of those things that I mentioned, and I'm just naming some of them, is that each one of them takes time, and you have to factor that in. And I'll give an example. So for us, we had a ton of trouble getting the and I'm not going to say it right, the microcoding, did I say that correctly, on the checks in the exact right place. The way that the process works, so our bank, we reached out to our representative, said, hey, we're switching accounting software. We want to send you some sample checks. We thought we had it right. We're like, this is going to be a piece of cake. So they needed to see 5 checks, voided. So we printed out 5 checks. We had to mail it to them, so we would FedEx it, and then they needed a couple days on their end to do the testing, and then they would turn around and tell us if we passed or failed. So, I would say probably a week in total to get all of this done. So we had failed. So we're like, okay, so trying to decipher what they send you is just it's like literally reading hieroglyphics. I was like, okay, so this here. So anyway, we reconfigured it again, positive, we've got it right. So we went through this process, I would say 4 or 5 times. And so the one tip that I will share with you here is invest in $20 and buy one of the microcoding rulers that you can buy on Amazon. If we had only done that from the very beginning, it's well worth the price. So I just mentioned this. This is just an example. So there's not everything is going to be that cumbersome, but at least one of the things that you're doing will be. So you always want to just make sure that you build in enough time to get these milestones done. And then the other thing is for bringing over your customers and your vendors, you think, okay, well, that's not hard. You can export everything out of the system, put it in the correct format, import it. But once you start that, you might think to yourself, hey, this is a perfect time to clean things up, to clean up our data. We have been with SL for 20 years. We had vendors and customers that we had 0 activity with for at least 15 years. And so there was no point in bringing those over. So then we had to take the time, to kind of sort by last activity. Does it make sense to bring this customer or vendor over or not? Those are some of the milestones. And just for all of those, just make sure you think about just pad in extra time, because you just don't know how long it's going to take.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. Just to share that. So, you were right in that window. Typically, what we say, it takes 3 to 5 months or 3 to 6 months to do implementation, and there's lots of driving reasons that drive it to 3 and to 6. And you discussed many of those as well. Quite often, it's really your decision and your team's ability to take on new tasks, because we realize that you have your day job and you need to learn a new system as well. And so you don't want to overwhelm the team. And so you want to take the proper amount of time to do that. The check printing thing, boy, that's the bane of my existence. What I've learned is that every printer is different, and they're different from printer to printer. Just the way the rubber pulls it is slightly different. And banks are so picky about that. Right?
Yes.
And what a great tip about just gathering that little clear rule where where everything has to line up. That's immeasurable. And then finally, we encourage people to think about the way things are designed now and the way you want to have them in the future. Two things. Quite often, things are designed based upon the way things were 10 or 20 years ago, and that may not be the way your business is today. So take that opportunity to restructure and redesign. Secondly, there may be new features inside of Sage Intacct that you didn't have in SL. And so you created workarounds in SL. Let's take advantage of those features. But that may require some reworking the data and rethinking the data. So take the time to do that as well. Finally, cleaning up the data prior to bringing it is always something that's beneficial. You don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. If we got two vendors that are the same vendor, let's not bring them both over. Let's bring the one vendor over that we want to. So those are all great tips, and we see those over and over again. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure. And I just was thinking of one extra thing. So, when you set this timeline, it's basically just your team that cares if you meet this timeline. That's what I realized, because we have all staff meetings every 2 weeks. And so we'd give an update like, hey, we expect that we're going to go live July 1st. And then when we said, hey, we decided to push it back a little bit, no one cared. Like, they don't care, if we transition to new accounting software. It was us who cared the most. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's like you're putting the pressure on yourself, which is fine. But, that's different than like if everybody is waiting for this transition from you. So it makes you feel better.
Great. Change your point of view. Yeah, right. Change your point of view and things look completely different. So,
yeah.
I think we touched on some of this already. There's some of the key features of Sage Intacct. Some of the ones I'll resonate again is, because it's a cloud-based solution, you have access anywhere, anytime, through any medium that you want to, your computer, your laptop. You can do it with your cell phone. I wouldn't recommend you do it, but you can do it through your cell phone if you want to. But it's all nestled in this very secure environment. So Sage Intacct sits in world-class data centers with teams, armies. I mean, Microsoft invested over $2 billion last year in security. And they have leverage that we just don't have, as individual companies here today as well. So that accessibility anywhere, anytime is truly immeasurable in your ability to basically process anywhere you want to. So if you've got remote teams or teams that are coming in 2 or 3 days a week, there's no difference in the experience. Experience is the same whether I do it here or whether I do it at the office, that sort of thing. Are there any other things that you can think of that Intacct had provided that you just want to share with the team share with the attendees here about things that you really love about Sage Intacct or things that you really wanted that Sage Intacct had?
Yeah, well, so you just mentioned one of the key ones. And so I do love that I can log in if, sometimes I have logged into my phone. You're right, it's very small, but if that's all you have, that's what you can do. And of course you can just kind of zoom into whatever it is you need to see. So it's nice to at least have that option. And then the other thing I like about it is because it is web-based, I love the fact that I can duplicate my tab. And so sometimes I'll have 6 tabs open. So on one screen, on one of my monitors, I might have 2 different tabs open, and then on the other monitor, 2 other tabs. And for me, that's just great because, I can look at one screen and look at another screen at the same time. So it's just an example of one of the nice features of how modern it feels. And then, of course, since I mentioned one of the banes of my existence when I first started was the fact that we had so much paper everywhere. Having all of our backup documents inside the software has just been amazing. I mean, I love the fact that I can, I have a dashboard. I can look at the financial statements. If I have any questions, I can drill down. I can see the actual invoice. I can see who approved it. If I drill down to a journal entry, same thing. I can see the backup. We even have, Heidi, who is our senior staff accountant who I work with, she is all about using the software to its fullest. So she tries to save everything in the accounting software. So we have actually a document folder where we save all of our contracts. And that was a request per our CEO, because when he goes in to approve payments and we have an invoice with a company that we would have a contract with, he wants to be able to also access the original contract. So, he has access to see everything that's in that folder. So, I mean, that's a huge plus about the software. But if I had to pick one thing about the functionality and the feature that Sage Intacct provides, especially coming from SL, is the fact that before we close a period, I can fix posted entries. Like this is how it works. Okay, so I'm reviewing the financial statements in Intacct, and I drill down and I see, oh, this is not where it should be coded. I can right then and there open that entry up. I can edit. I can click on edit. I can make the change. I can repost it. I can refresh my screen, and voila, I see the corrected financial statements or whatever it is I'm looking at. When I was in SL, and this is embarrassing to admit, but I would see something that needed to be fixed. I'd make what I thought was a correcting entry. I would make it the wrong way. So then I'd make an entry to correct my correcting entry. So I love the fact that I can fix things. Everything has an audit trail in there, which is really nice. And then, of course, once it's closed, you can't do that. So, I mean, obviously, there are controls involved. And then the other thing I'll say is, and I mentioned it, the dashboard. The dashboards are great. Both Heidi and I have our own dashboards. They look completely different. I have actual financial statements on there that I can open up. I have links to the reports that I access the most quickly. I have links to the screens that I access the most often, and I have them even linked to specific views. So, for example, Heidi enters in accounts payable, the bills, that's what they're called in Intacct, the invoices, and then I'm the one who has to go in and review them and post them. But sometimes she has things on hold. So Heidi, and I'll talk about this a little later, Heidi has taken full advantage of everything, and she's added some extra features. And so she has like this checkbox to say that it's on hold. And so I have a view that shows me that on hold box. And so I know that if something is marked as on hold, I'm not going to post that. So my link takes me to that screen with that exact view. So you can really like tailor it to what you need. And then our financial statement users, we have the 10 user employee pack, and each budget owner has their own dashboard, and it's customized to them. We started by having everybody be pretty similar. But as we have quarterly reviews, and each quarter we're like, is there anything additional that you would like to have? And as we've gone along, we do get requests. So people might have reports that are customized to exactly what they need. And then the last thing that I will say, there's just so many things, it's hard to narrow it down. I keep thinking of more. So we have 2 companies. And actually at my last association, we had 18 companies that we had in Sage Intacct. So here we just have 2, which seems much simpler, which is nice. But I love that you can do the transactions at the top level, and you can make entries that will hit both just like for us, our association, and then also our pack. And then it will create the inter-entity transaction for us. So that's just really nice as well. And I will stop there because I could keep going and we have limited time.
That's really great. I don't think I could say any better than you did. So we're just going to go ahead and move on to the next. But thank you for sharing all those cool things. Here's what I will say. When I started working with Sage Intacct, I had to rethink the way I do things because I had flexibility and didn't have an SL. So like you said, like changing a journal entry wasn't something you could do in SL. And you really rethink your process, it's much smoother and much quicker, I think. All security based, so you can prevent people from doing this if you want to, but if you have the right people who you want to be able to make those changes, you can do so. And of course, whenever you close a period, you can't do that stuff anymore. So you're not changing stuff historically, but you're changing the stuff you're trying to work on this period, and it just changes the game for me with respect to month end closing. So I'll leave it at that. But that was great. Thank you, Jennifer.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about management of the implementation itself. Did you have a plan? How was progress tracked and communicated? How was feedback given? How did you know that you were on time? Or how did you know that you weren't really going to make that first goal we had set? And a more realistic goal was this. Share a little thoughts about the management of the implementation.
Sure. So on our side, we have a fairly small team. I mean, it is a small team. It's just me and Heidi who handle finance. And so on our side, we tag teamed it. We both were involved in pretty much everything. And even though like I might make some final decisions on things, I always wanted Heidi's input. But I can say that at my last association, we were a larger group. So we didn't all do it, but I would say at least half of the staff was involved in every meeting, and then we would bring people in as needed. But with this most recent implementation, it was both of us. And the nice thing is we didn't have to come up with an implementation plan. The consultants that we worked with Quisitive, they had a implementation plan in place. And it was really nice because it outlined what the task was. It had a date where, and this was just to begin with, we had updated it all the time, but it had a date that we expected to have it finished, who was responsible for it, who owned doing that task, and then just any notes on the side. And so this is something that every meeting that we had, we would go through this implementation plan, and not necessarily every step, but we would look at what things did we say were going to be done by this within the past week, and we would update it as necessary. And so by doing this, like there were a couple of things where we just were behind on, and we were like, there's no way we're going to get this done, because Heidi and I, not only do we do finance, but as Jeff, as you mentioned in the beginning, we handle HR and we handle IT and facilities. So there's a lot of other things that come into play, and we couldn't just focus on finance. And we knew that we couldn't make some of these deadlines, and it was on us, and that was fine. You can only devote as much time as you can. So there was a ton of communication about everything that we would do. And at the end of each meeting, Susan, who we worked with, she would actually, in base camp, she would write a to-do list. So we knew that week, this is what we had to do. So that was also really helpful. In terms of issues and roadblocks, I mean, I talked about some of the, the deadlines and some that I mentioned with the banking. But a lot of times the biggest roadblock is the fact that you have other things that you have to do besides implementing the accounting software. So yes, you do need to make it a focus if you want to make things on time, but things come up and other things take priority. And so that's the biggest thing, is just being able to devote the time. But what's nice about it, as I mentioned, generally no one cares too much that, you're pushing back a month or two, and it's not hard to do. It seems like, oh, that's going to create more work. But to be honest, once you have a process in place for getting the data in the system, adding in one more month of bringing data in, it's just not a big deal. It's the hard part is figuring out the very first time. So it was all very smooth, and I fully give credit to our consultants who were, at first I was like, really, do we need to go through this plan again? But inevitably there was one task and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot we were supposed to do that, or yeah, let's push that back a week. So it actually was really very helpful.
All about good communication, I think.
Yes, exactly.
communication. So excellent. Thank you. So data migration, I think you touched on some of these points as well. So feel free if there's anything you want to add to it. The questions I think that the people who are attending this session would want to know is, what was the process like of getting the data? What things did I have to do to get the data ready? What things did I want to do? Like you mentioned about cleaning up vendors and that sort of stuff. And then how, after it's done, how was I confident that what was brought across was what I wanted and matches what I had in the old system? Maybe it doesn't match exactly because it's been transformed,
Right.
But how did I tie those things out to make sure that they worked? Could you share some thoughts there?
Yes. So the plan for data migration. So one of the things that we had to consider was how much detail did we want to bring into the software? How far back did we want to go? And so for us, what we decided was that since it was 2023 that we were implementing, that we were migrating, we decided that we wanted month-end balances from 2022, and then we wanted all the transactional detail from 2023. So that was step one, just figuring out like how much we wanted to do. And then the second step was figuring out how were we going to get that data, how were we going to get it out of the old software and into the new software. And to be honest, it wasn't that hard. I mean, SL, for example, you could export, trial balance out of the system into Excel, and then all you really had to do was know what's the format for importing it into Intacct and just massage the data and put it into the correct format. And then once you do it once, so once you started with like 1 month, that first month, you're like, okay, you get error messages, you're like, I know I'm doing everything right, but clearly you're not because it's unsuccessful. So figuring out the kinks that first month, once you've done that, then the rest of the months are pretty easy. You've got kind of your template in place as to how you're going to do this. For us, it was a little added wrinkle because we changed our chart of accounts, but we just had a VLOOKUP. Yeah. So we just were able to manage it that way. And I will say that having the transactional detail, of course, it's more information, but it wasn't that hard. We exported the detailed general ledger into Excel, massaged the data, imported it into the new system. And for us, that's great because we don't need to see the transactional detail from last year that much. But for this year, like when we run the financial statements, it's great because we have all the transactions for the entire year. And it just almost like emphasizes the fact that we made the right decision, because I look back at things from February and I'm like, oh, I can't drill down to see the actual invoice, whereas anything from September on in 2023, I can. And I'm like, gosh, I'm so glad I can do this now. And the same thing with the vendors and the customers, it's really just the initial time that you do it and trying to figure out, what you're doing wrong in terms of putting it into the correct format. And then in terms of the data accuracy and integrity, the way that we did it is, and because we had changed, like you referenced, it's not, for us, it wasn't exactly the same because we made some changes. What we would do is I would run the trial balance in both systems, and I would just really make sure at a high level that the balance sheet accounts like that. Well, I would actually look at the revenue and the total expenses, make sure those look good. And then I would run out of Intacct. I had created, and it was still at this point pretty preliminary, but just like a basic balance sheet and a basic income statement so that I could compare those. And my biggest thing was, does my balance sheet match up with the old system? And then in the financial statements, I was most interested in the bottom line. Is my bottom line correct? And does that match up? And so those were the two things. So it really wasn't that hard to verify the data. It was just, again, the first time you were doing it, making sure it was there, and then you were set going forward. And that's just what made it easier when we pushed back from going live July 1st to September 1st. I mean, we had our model in place. And so the fact that we had to migrate 2 more months of data was not a big deal. We knew what we were doing. So it was pretty straightforward.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And, I think you're right about that. If the balance sheet balances and if the revenues and the profit all tie out, You know it all came over. It's just a question of how it was mapped, right?
Right.
You know there's mapping changes anyway.
Yeah.
So you can just highlight those areas that you're looking for the differences that you made. Once you sign off on that, then you're good to go. What I also share is that most of our customers, just like you, find 2 years is kind of the sweet spot of effort relative to payback. Once you look beyond 2 or 3 years, your business has changed significantly enough, or is different enough that looking back that far is not done all that often. And it's important to note that with SL and other systems that you can keep those other systems up for a period of time. So if you need to go back and research in SL, you can do that. And there's the options. You can either keep it on site where you have it. We have some hosting options for clients as well. But think about that. Like you have access for an extended period of time, not forever, but for an extended period of time to the old system. And then that kind of drives how much data you want to convert. Now we have some clients that need 7 years because that's just the way it is. We bring it across, no sweat. But really 2 years is kind of the sweet spot, as you mentioned. And so you were right in line with most of our customers.
Yeah, and we did out of SL, we did export historical reports. So we have them all saved so that if we need to go back, and of course we have financial statements exported to Excel with the transactional detail. So we have all that stuff in case we do need to go back. Of course, it's not as easy to access, but that's fine. It's not that often. And we had our audit, we just ended, as a matter of fact, for 2023. So now that we've gotten through that milestone, I really feel like there's going to be even less reason to ever have to go back further than what we have in the system.
That's great. So just a couple of questions, and then we'll wrap up in just a few minutes here. Just a little bit about the training experience. So you had users that needed to understand and use the new system. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of training techniques or tools that you used that help guide the users along to learn the new system?
Sure. So as we were going through the implementation, our consultants we had training sessions. And so they would walk us through the most commonly used screens, the reports, show us how to do things. Now, of course, I had the added benefit of the fact that I had used Intacct at my last organization. So I felt like sometimes I felt kind of bad, like, wait, I've got this, and I would do the training. But it probably would have been better if I hadn't. Anyway, there's very good training that takes place as you're implementing everything. And then what's nice is it the FDRs? We had these checklists that we had to go through kind of for each of the different modules in Intacct, where it was like, can you do this? Or, how do you set up a new a new account?
User acceptance testing script.
Yes, the user testing. So that was actually really helpful because even I, who had used Intacct before, I would go through that and I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember how to do that, or even what this is used for. And so it's very helpful because you look at it and you're like, okay, let me take a look in the system and make sure I understand what it is. So it's it's a checklist. It reminds you what you need to do. Some of the stuff you're not going to use, but at least you know that it's an option, because you never know when your needs are going to change. So it's useful to just even know that it's there. And then, on Intacct has a ton of live ongoing, not live support, but videos. And so again, because I knew the system pretty well, I didn't use it as much, but Heidi, she was on it all the time. So she really took to the system. And as a matter of fact, she makes me laugh because she's always adding new things all the time in the system. But so she's a big believer in using all of these videos. There's a ton of things out there. Of course, there's the help that's actually in the Intacct. And a lot of times just simply saying help on this screen is helpful enough. And that's really easy because you're like, okay, what do I use this for? Or what does this pay by date mean? Or whatever field it is that you need help with, you can get that really drill down to exactly what that's meant to be used for. And then the last thing I'll say is that, of course, there's the Sage Intacct conference. And so Heidi, I had gone to it once a couple of years ago. And then Heidi went just this past February. And I mean, it's not something I would necessarily do every year, but it's definitely worthwhile because you see what's coming up, which is really nice because there's always new releases that are happening, which is one of the things I like. It's like always constantly being updated. They take Sage Intacct, they take into account requests that people have. But that conference is good because you can pick up tips and tricks. You can actually go and speak to people and ask about things. You can learn more about the vendors who interact with Intacct, and you can just network and talk to other people who use the system. So it's really useful. And when Heidi came back from the conference, she was like, oh, and I think we need to do this, 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 and then this. It's like, awesome. So, I mean, it's great because there truly is a community of Intacct users. I mean, the whole reason I went with Intacct at my last organization, I didn't know much about it, but literally every person I talked to who had migrated into a new accounting software was like, oh yeah, we switched to Intacct. I'm like, well, if everyone's doing it, it must be good.
Yeah, so I'm a great believer in the conference as well. I mean, it gets me super jazzed up. But like you said, just seeing it from a different point of view and listening to how other people using the software gives you great ideas. There's a lot of training opportunities there as well. So highly recommend at least once every other year spending time there because I really think you make an investment in something as Sage Intacct, you want to leverage that. You want to take it as far as you possibly can. And you do that through education. That finally, I guess it's important to note that that learning registration you talked about, the Sage Intacct training is available during the first year of implementation. It's part of what gets sold when you purchase Sage Intacct. So you don't only get training from the consultants of Quisitive, but also from other instructors, pre-recorded sessions where users can see a different point of view. And it's really the two together that I think that provides the best training opportunity for our customers. So we've got just about 2 minutes, and then one quick question: what's next?
Yeah, so here's the thing. It's almost in a way like Excel. You know how you say it, they say like most people only use like 10% of the capabilities of Excel. So I kind of feel that way with Intacct. I feel like there are things that we could be doing that we just don't even know that we can do. And Heidi is great at this because she's always just tinkering around. And so she has, I'm not even gonna be able to explain it, but like with the objects, like she's added like checkboxes and fields to our different screens that has been like really useful. And so we use those all the time now. And she just did that all on her own. That wasn't something that I knew how to do. And so like another example, and this is a little simpler, but there's the checklist in there. We just had never used the checklist, but we're starting to use the checklist and seeing how we can adapt that to our monthly close and the chat even. So this is something else we started. We meet with the budget managers on a quarterly basis to go through their financial statements. And of course, every month we tell them, hey, we're closed. You can go and look at your financials. But this way we're meeting with them, and our auditors have said, hey, we need proof that you're meeting with them. So Heidi was like, let's have them respond in the chat. So after we meet with them, they go to their chat and they say something like at Heidi and at Jen, thanks for the first quarter review, no further questions. So it's all captured in the system. So again, just like learning everything that it has to offer, there's just so much to learn. And then also for us specifically, one thing that we are thinking of doing is possibly integrating with Bill.com. I feel like we use the system really well, but like it might be nice to have somebody else pay the bills and have a whole extra system. And I know that that's a vendor that works with Intacct a lot. So just kind of seeing what's out there, if it makes sense for us, if it's affordable. They're always putting out new releases. And so one of the things I like to do when I log in, you get a message saying, hey, you want to see what's in in release 4.5 or whatever release number it is. And so even though like I might be busy, I do try to open that just so I can scan it and see if there's anything in there that makes sense for me to later go back and learn more about. So yeah, who knows what more could come, but always something new.
Well, you gave me an opportunity to pitch another session that we were having here, and that's what's new in Sage Intacct. So go back and take a look at that one if you want to. We highlight some of the new features and functionality, some stuff that's come in the last year or so, some of which I think is very, very useful. So Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story, your journey with Sage Intacct with the attendees of this session. I know it means a lot to them to understand what it feels like to go through that. What are the pitfalls? What are the things to watch out for? What are the tips and tricks? And I think it'll help them leverage it for years to come. So thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it. This concludes this session right now. Please don't forget to fill out your questionnaires. So I want to thank you all for attending this session and attending the Unite conference as a whole. We hope that you all found something meaningful and some useful little tidbit that you can take to change your life every day when you use Sage Intacct or as you go through your accounting processes. So thank you very much, Jennifer. And
Thank
everybody,
you.